When I first started looking at all these pictures, I used a magnifying glass. It was really helpful, especially when we were looking at pictures that were satellite images looking down, and you could see structures, but with the magnifying glass, that really brought it in. I had a really powerful one. So I would say by all means use it. You're not always going to need it on the pictures that I show, but sometimes you will. In the second half of this video, you will need one. Or I'm not saying you need it. It would definitely enhance it, because I'm still trying really hard to bring these small things out. But you can only enlarge it so much before it gets pretty fuzzy. But the key to everything on Mars is scale. And like this picture right here, you're looking at a rocky bluff in the distance and a bunch of rocks in front of you. And they're not rocks, and they're quite large. And this is the repeating theme in every single picture that you get from the NASA archive on Mars. And these kinds of pictures, everything is much, much larger than you realize. And so when you zoom in on these things, where you would normally think you're going to be just zooming in on a rock, you zoom in on it, and all of a sudden you find out it's much more than a rock. But this area here on top of this bluff up here is it looks like Machu Picchu or something. It's fantastic. Tell me that there isn't a connection between Mars and Earth. I mean, there has to be. It can't be that much of a coincidence. And maybe that's everywhere. I don't know. The inverted picture gives you a pretty good skyline in the background there. And also highlights, the stair-step design, this pyramid-shaped design. And frankly, I'm not sure if we're looking at the pyramid shape there or triangles. It could just be a triangular shape, because that's also a recurring theme everywhere you look in all of these pictures. And this picture, though, on the skyline with these structures up there, we don't get very many of these kinds of pictures. This is a really telling picture. But most people will think, and they're looking at rocks, and without me colorizing it, it's hard to distinguish it. It does look like rubble. I mean, it looks like it kind of looks like rocks. But if you do nutcase like me, and you take the time and you focus in on it and you enlarge it, and I can actually outline these things pixels by pixels. So that's what I do for the most part. There's openings are famous everywhere on Mars, and there's an opening there with a little round dot in the middle. I don't know what that is. I have a few ideas. The key to everything on Mars is scale. And here you're looking at all these rocks right in front of you, and rocks that go up the hill, and they're not rocks. And they're much, much larger than you can even imagine until you focus in on them. And unfortunately, in this raw image right here, it's pretty bad picture, but you clear it up a little bit. Now, these big rocks here are not rocks. They are structures made of structures. And on the one on the right, you can see the big U shape, and on the top right of that are square structures up on top that you can make out their outline. And that's all amazing, but the really amazing part is what's in the middle. And all around, all that chocolate brown looking stuff is all structures, and it's the hardest thing to bring out. That's what's under the chocolate haze that NASA puts in there. And if you look very, very closely in between these two big structures down there in that sand, you can see ghostly outlines of high-rise buildings. And that's the way it is. It's like New York City times 1,000, edge to edge. They go everywhere. That's just the way it is on Mars. Got hundreds of pictures like this, and I just have to be able to find a way to bring it out. But there are times when I look at pictures like this and I see a standalone structure there, just a small square cube, standing there, and I thought, well, that's interesting. It's one building out in the middle of nowhere. But actually, it's the top of a high-rise that didn't get covered by the chocolate milk. And, you know, I'll get into some of that later. It's one thing to talk about. It's something else to actually see it. It's a pretty good picture. Now look at take a look in the background there. You see the shape of that rubble? That's not rubble. Those are all structures. You know, and I prefer to look at not the raw images, but the ones that I've developed. Now, if you look at the triangular structure on the left, you'll see. Look very closely there, and you can see individual high-rise buildings going up the middle of it there. That whole thing is made out of buildings, but if you look closely, you can actually see individual structures that make up the overall shape. And the same is also true with the other one on the right. I'm going to show more examples in the future, but you know, this is where I say a magnifying glass would work really well, just to be able to see these individual structures that make up the big structure. And it's the same shapes always, triangular. And the one on the right, I think, is in the process of being constructed. You can see a black line going up the left side that's starting to swirl up the other side. This is a repeated structural thing that they do, and that thing's going to end up being a great big tall triangular. What looks like a rock is not going to be a rock. It's going to be a huge structure. Now this thing is in the process of being built. I'm positive of that. You can see in the top right of that the roof lines. So this is not a rock down in front of you. You know, maybe you have to go back and take a look at where we started with this. This thing is really huge. And you can see the ghostly shapes of the buildings in between those two structures there. Go back and take a look. Thanks a lot for watching, folks.